I know many of you have been wondering, how's Tom? How's he doing? He is doing great, all things considered in there. His surgery was on Thursday. The doctors considered it a success. They said it was as great as they could have hoped for, and if that is good enough for a doctor, that is good enough for me, right? There we go. His biggest thing right now that they told him and that he's going to struggle with is they just told him, you need to rest. You need to just sit and do nothing. And I know that's like crushing him inside, but he is doing well. He so appreciates just the numerous ways that you guys have reached out, whether it was phone calls, text messages, Facebook, email. I tell you, he can't keep up, but he is so appreciative, he and Linda both, just at the outpouring of love from you guys. And I love just that testimony of this. That's what family does for each other. And that's what we seek to be here at Northfield. We seek to be family to one another. And so thank you for that. He was watching first service. I did catch him. I waved to him on there, but he might be watching again second service. I don't know, it could be. But we do have a really special way that if you want to do something for him, there's a little notebook that's out in the coffee shop, actually. And so after service, once we dismiss this morning, if you want to go and just write an encouraging note to him, just write just kind of a scripture, or just anything that you would like to do to encourage him, you can put it in that little notebook and we'll drop it to him at the beginning of this week, and then we'll get it back next Sunday. And so if you want to write something new in there, just a way that he can stay connected to each and every one of you here today. So when I was in 7th grade, I experienced my first heartbreak. Her name was Lindsay, and I was in love. And what I found out was that life can come at you very, very quickly. Because I lived through in 7th grade, in one of those middle school moments that I have endured in life, I encountered my first experience with what it looks like to have my heart ripped out of my chest and thrown on the ground and then stepped on and then like pushed in even more. Anybody ever been there before? Just those middle school moments. And in this, like, I had never felt a pain like this before. This is the first time that something like this had happened to me, and I was distraught. So I did what every 7th grade boy would do. I held it together. I got home. Like I had to endure it like with mom in the car. Y'all know how hard that is. So you're just like, nope, I'm gonna keep it together because mom's gonna ask questions I don't want to talk about. And so you gotta like keep it together, and you get home, and finally I found a way to just kind of express my feelings, and it came through song, and it came through "Let It Burn" by Usher. Anybody ever been there? Y'all know, don't laugh at me. This is a horrifying moment in my life. I'm sharing with you guys. Y'all gonna laugh at me. But it came through just Usher baby. And that's just how it goes in life. But yesterday I experienced a similar heartbreak from the hours of about 2:30 to about 5 o'clock as I watched the University of Tennessee get beat by Georgia. Don't you clap for that. I'm fine, by the way. Hey, my name is Trent. I am the student pastor here at Northfield. It's so good to see all of you. Thanks for gathering together here. If you're joining us on the app, I want to say hello, good morning to you. Thanks for tuning in. Or if you're watching later on to kind of pick back up in this series, or if you're one of the select few that get to join us live and in person, thanks for being here. We're kicking off a brand new series this week that's going to go this whole month of September that we're calling Heart Attack. And you probably figured out by now that this is a church, this is not a doctor's office, that we're not talking about your physical heart when we get into this series. As we're looking at this heart attack series, we're talking about your spiritual heart. We're going to talk about what happens on the inside, because what happens on the inside has a way of making its way on the outside. Many of you have probably experienced that before, but our hearts are these mysterious things. You hear poets and philosophers and musicians. You hear people talk about your heart all the time, even though it's not a tangible thing that you can get your hands on, but your heart is still important. But it's such a mysterious thing because we have these encounters with our heart day in and day out. Our hearts are kind of the where everything in our life flows through. But our hearts are those things that, you know, parents, you know that feeling like when your kid does something really good, they do something great, your heart is that thing that just like swells with joy because you're like, oh, I'm not crazy. Like they're a decent human being. This is great. And one of the things I love about my job and that Anna loves about her job is we love to just cue the parent. We love to just find ways and hear ways that your kid does something incredible outside of you being there. You know, that they didn't do it because they wanted to look good, but they did something that was just extraordinary. And I love being able to tell parents those things, but I always start them the same way. So I'm like, tip my hand at how I respond. But I love to go up to parents and be like, I have to tell you what your kid said today. Because every parent goes, what did they say? Like, because you're like, there's no telling what could have come out of their mouth. But I just love sharing that moment because as a parent, it's just this sigh of, not a sigh of relief, but it is just this sense of pride that comes up in your kids because you're like, oh yes, like I'm so thankful to hear that. But also like, your heart is that place that also just kind of swells with nostalgia. You know, whatever song it was that was popular when you were like senior year of high school, you know. For me, it was Low by Flo Rida featuring T-Pain. That every time I hear that song, it just takes me back. I'm just like, oh man, like I miss 17-year-old Trent. Like that dude thought he was so cool. And just like, I love that. But you know those songs and you know those things in your life. It just takes you back somewhere. And that happens in your heart. You can't put your finger on it, but it happens somewhere inside. But you know, it's also the same place that fills with rage when somebody cuts you off when you're behind the wheel of the car. Like some of you you're like me that like you really got to keep it together. You're like, I have a Northfield sticker on the back of my car. I have a Northfield sticker on the back of my car. I hope I don't go to church with this person. Like it's just like one of those like you got to keep it in check, but there's something in you that just gets filled with this rage that happens. And then like there's also something that happens inside of you and you can openly admit this or not. But isn't there something inside of you that when someone that you know or someone that's around you that you don't necessarily care for, like when something goes wrong for them, that you secretly are like, woo, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like I really am. Like that's a tragic thing, but you're like, yes, love that. Like who is that? Like where does that come from? And none of y'all are like that. I wouldn't do that. But we know like that's a reality that we face in life because there's just things that happen to us that we go, where did that come from? And it comes from this. It's just a small truth for you this morning. Life is hard on our hearts. There are a lot of good things that happen in our life. There are a lot of exciting things, but there are a lot of difficult things and there are a lot of tough things that we have to process through. And it makes life tough. It makes life hard on our hearts because this world is full of outside influences. It's full of different experiences and different encounters that make us do things or makes us say things that we go, I can't believe I just said that. Or I can't believe I just did that. I can't believe I just lost my temper that way. That's not me. That's not who I am. And these are just small realities that happen in our life and we go, I don't know where this came from, but like I don't like this, but it just happens. It becomes a part of our lives at times. We can, this is not who I want to be. And so what we do is we condition ourselves to not do those things, right? Behavior modification, y'all have experienced this. If you have young kids, you know, like the hand goes out, what do? Pop it. Like, nope, it comes back in. But then after a minute, it's just like the hand goes back out and you're like, no. My 9-month-old, Jack, he's in that like starting to crawl phase. He was doing like a weird zombie crawl with his head. He would like kind of put it out and then pull all of it. It was weird, but he's figuring it out. But he has noticed something. He can find every single electrical socket in a room. It is unbelievable. And I look at it, I'm like, it ain't gonna be that big a deal. And then I'm like, oh snap, his finger's like the size of that hole. Like there's no telling. And so you have to be like, nope. And you gotta like pop the hand back, pull it back. You don't do that. And what we know, what we've experienced is that if your hand gets popped too many times, what's gonna happen? You're not gonna stick your hand out there anymore. You're like, that's not good. And what we do is we condition ourselves to say, well, I'm not gonna do that. If that causes pain, then I'm not gonna do that. But what we don't do is we don't treat the root of the matter, We don't treat the root of the matter. We don't get to the heart behind things. We don't realize that there's a reason that we are acting a certain way. We just know if I stop doing this, then good things will happen. The reason I know that you do this is because most of you hold down a full-time job and you have to do behavior modification all the time because, raise your hand, how many of you have ever had a moment where you're like, you know what? My boss needs to know something and I'm gonna tell him right now. Huh? Those moments happen. But you know, in your head, you're like, behavior modification. If I do this, there will be consequences. If I say this, if I tell them how I really feel, if I really let them know what's going on in here, then it's not gonna go good for what's happening around here. And so we condition ourselves to treat behaviors, but we don't condition ourselves to treat what's going on the inside. We don't condition ourselves to treat the root of the matter, which gets to the heart of things in our lives. And just like with our physical hearts, when there are things on the inside that we may or may not even know about, when there are things that are going on the inside, they have the potential to drastically change our lives, to drastically change our quality of life and our condition and how things are going for us. The same thing is true for our spiritual hearts. There are things that enter our hearts and they have a way of getting lodged there and getting stuck there. And it's interesting how the good things, the positive things, they can make their way in and out of our hearts very quickly. But the negative things that we experience, the heartaches, the heartbreaks, the downside to life that we just face, it has a way of getting stuck in our hearts. And it lingers there and it stays there until in a moment that we weren't expecting, we just blow up and we say things that we don't mean and we do things that we don't mean and we go, that's not who I am. But for some reason, there's something within us that makes us this way. The truth of the matter is that everything in our lives, everything flows through our hearts. We live, we parent, we lead, we relate, we romance, we confront, we react, we respond, we instruct, we manage, we problem solve, and we love, all from our hearts. That's where that all comes from. And our hearts have the potential to really make things great, or they have the potential to make things horrible. Our hearts, the way that we've conditioned them, the way that we've trained them, the way that we deal with our hearts matters. Because the matters of the heart matter in our lives. The matters that are happening in our heart matter in our day-to-day lives. So we're going to look at a story this morning that Jesus tells. It's an incredible little moment that Jesus shares with the Pharisees and with his disciples, and just we're going to watch this story unfold. But Jesus talks about the importance. Jesus shifts the focus of our lives, and he talks about the importance of what is going on the inside, because what is going on the inside matters and has an effect on what's going on the outside of our lives. If you want to follow along from your seat, from kind of where you are this morning, you can jump in. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 15. If you just have a Bible and you cut it in half, just go to the right. It's the first book when you get to the New Testament, or you probably can find it on your phone, or worst case scenario, I'm going to put it up on the screen for you anyway, and you can read along there. But here's how the story starts. It says, "Then the Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem, and they said, 'Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat.'" Now, at this point in the story, Jesus' name was getting out there. Jesus was becoming pretty popular to the area of the world right there. And it was because Jesus was doing a lot of good things. Jesus was doing a lot of big things. Jesus was performing miracles. Jesus was teaching mighty, mighty ways. Jesus was providing a lot for people around them, and people were just coming in droves to see Jesus. But not everybody was a big fan of Jesus, and there was one specific thing that Jesus was doing that people didn't always like, specifically the Pharisees in this story that we're going to meet, because Jesus kept saying things like, "I'm the Son of God." Jesus kept claiming to do things in the name of God. Jesus kept claiming to be God. Now, for us, we look at the story and we're like, yeah, he is God. But we have the benefit of reading from this side of the resurrection. You got to think, these people had no idea what was coming. For us, we're like, you know what? If somebody can predict, pull off their own death, burial, and then resurrection, you're like, I'm with that guy, right? But think about it. If somebody were to come up to you today at Kroger and just be like, "Excuse me, sir, I want you to know I'm the Son of God," you're going to be like, "Okay, kids, let's go." We're out of here. If somebody is claiming to be the Son of God or claiming to be God, you're going to be a little bit skeptical. And that's how these people were in this day and age. But Jesus would begin to back it up. And Jesus would begin to perform signs, and people would see that. But these Pharisees and these scribes, they would look at it and they would be like, "No, he's blaspheming, he's wrong." And what he was doing was Jesus was actually exposing a lot of the hypocrisy that happened between these people groups and these religious elites. And so it's an incredible moment, because all throughout Jesus' ministry, you would see people that would come up and they would try to trick Jesus. They would try to get him to slip up. If we can cut his credibility in some way, then we can point out and go, "Ha, he's not who he says he is. He's not the Son of God. You don't need to listen to him," and people would leave him. But every time they would try to do that, every time they would try to trip him up, Jesus would say something or he would do something that would just leave people in awe, and it would attract more people to them. This is one of those stories. And so it starts, and it says the Pharisees, they came from Jerusalem, which meant they sent the big guns, okay? Things were getting serious. We need to send the big guys out there. And so he sent the big ones out there, and they realized, the disciples, Jesus' disciples, his followers, they don't keep up with the tradition of the elders. Now, if you look back in the Old Testament, if you look back at Jewish regulations, you have the 10 Commandments, you had the big ones. Well, then from that came added laws and came added things after that. And this tradition of the elders they were kind of unwritten rules of how you were to live your life and how you were to do things. And so this tradition of the elders was given a whole lot of credibility as to how you were supposed to live your life. Well, they accused the disciples of not washing their hands before they ate. Now, before you guys are like jumping on board for the Pharisees to be like, you should wash your hands before you eat. Are you kidding me? That's not what we're talking about. You see, they thought that at any point in time, at any point in your life, as you're walking through the marketplace, there's a potential for you to encounter someone who was not clean. And when I say not clean, I mean ceremonially clean. I'm talking like so unclean that they are defiled before God. And so in this, the disciples and all, they begin eating. And so these Pharisees, they think, well, if you are taking something with your potentially unclean hands and you're taking food and ingesting it, what that does is that will make you unclean. And so they said, well, what you have to do is before you eat, you have to participate in this ritual where you wash your hands and all the way up and even to your elbows. Good luck teaching your kids that one. And so they say, you need to wash your hands to this standard for how you're supposed to go. But they said, but Jesus, your people don't do this. Your disciples don't do this. What's the deal? Thinking, okay, here we go. We're going to trip him up. But Jesus responds back in a way that you're like, oh man, he drops the hammer on him. He says, and why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? Wolf. For God said, honor your father and mother, and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that if anyone declares that what they might have used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, they are not to honor their father or mother with it. Thus, here's the gut punch here. He says, thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. Oh man. So Jesus comes back and he subtly, not so subtly, reminds these people of the ways that they are actually violating God's law by this little loophole that they have used when you talk about these traditions of the elders. You see, every parent's favorite commandment is honor your father and mother. It's the one that you're like really pointing out the emphasis to your kids. You're like, look at this one. See? And there's a big emphasis that's put on this, but Jesus points out and he exposes a way that these Pharisees, that these religious leaders, what they have done is they have elevated this tradition of the elders to a status that they can nullify actually having to listen to the command of honoring their father and mother. That all they have to say is, Mom, Dad, I know I'm supposed to care for you in your old age because you can't care for yourself, but the money that I was going to use to care for you, I have dedicated it to God. I have dedicated it to the temple. And whether or not they actually did that was not even in the equation. All they had to do was say that, and boom, they were off the hook. They didn't have to donate any money to the temple, and they were also off the hook for having to care for their father or mother. Low, right? All parents are like, man, that's not cool. I don't know where I was on this. Okay, I'll catch you up this way. If you haven't been paying attention or that just went like, whoop, here's what's happening, okay? The people that were trying to catch Jesus belittling the tradition of the elders were the same people who were using this tradition of the elders to belittle God's commandments, okay? That's where you see this disconnect happening between Jesus and between these religious leaders. And they come at Jesus hard, and Jesus comes back even harder and tells them like, look, what you're doing is wrong. And then he goes a step further. He makes a huge, huge statement. He says this. He says he calls the people all to him, and he said, listen, hear this, understand this. You got to grasp this. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a person. Now, this was huge in this day and age because Jewish people have more dietary restrictions on them than we can even keep up with. And so to them, as you're looking at this story, as Jewish people are hearing this story, you're like, but Jesus, there are a lot of restrictions of what goes into our mouths is going to make us unclean or is going to defile us. But Jesus came to fix and to save this world. And what he does is he flips something. He flips all of these regulations and he flips all these rules. And what he says is it is not what goes into your mouth that can make you unclean, but it is the things that can come out of your mouth that will put you at odds with God. What you ingest may not put you at odds with God, but what you say to someone else, what comes out from inside of you, that has the potential to put you at odds with God. And so, Jesus just like mic drops and leaves, like says this, like boom, and I'm out. And you know, like as Jesus is walking away, the disciples are like, yeah, what he said, that's right. And they go to another place, and it's so cool because in this, like they had no idea what was really going on. Like this was brand new to them as well. And so as they're hearing this, it's just like this profound moment for them. And then like Peter just comes back and like, God loved Peter, okay? Peter's the one, like every friend group needs a Peter, the one that's just like outspoken, that's willing to say what may embarrass him, what's just like, I'm gonna lay all my cards on the table, like this is where I'm at. And Peter comes back to Jesus and they say like, hey Jesus, this is like it's 2019 in here. He says, do you know that the Pharisees were really offended with what you said to them earlier? Like, did you know that like you really ruffled some feathers here? They did not appreciate it. And Jesus comes back. Jesus doesn't miss a beat. He goes, leave them alone. Let them go. These people are blind guides. And you've heard this saying before outside of just the church world. He says, and the blind will lead the blind and they'll both fall into a pit. The blind leading the blind will both fall into a pit, because what Jesus is saying is he says, look, these people claim to be the authorities when it comes to spiritual matters, but these people are so ugly on the inside. These people are so far gone that what they are doing is they are ultimately leading themselves, and unfortunately they're leading others astray because of the defilement that has happened within their hearts. And this is where Peter comes back and he goes, okay, but Jesus, will you explain to us this little parable? Will you explain this to us? And you know, one of the other disciples was like, oh, thank God. I didn't want to ask because I didn't know what was going on either. But Peter says, like, will you tell us what you were talking about? And Jesus replies, he goes, are you still so dull? You're like, that hurts a little. He says, don't you see that whatever enters into the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? To which the disciples were probably like, okay, we may have flunked out of rabbi school, but like, I understand how this works. I read a commentary this week. It just made me laugh because it's a very dignified way of saying what was happening in this moment in Jesus' explanation. Jesus' explanation was that food enters the mouth, it goes into the stomach for digestion, and then the unassimilated residue is eliminated. To which you're like, got it. I know what's going on here. And so Jesus says, don't you see that whatever enters into the mouth, that's not what makes you unclean. Because whatever goes into the mouth, goes into the stomach, gets digested, and it leaves the body. He goes, but the things that come out of a person's mouth, that's what defiles them. Eating with unwashed hands, no, that doesn't defile you. The things that come out of your mouth have the potential to defile you. And so Jesus continues to put this emphasis back on what it should be, not based on you and what you eat, but it comes back to you and how you treat others and how you treat the people around you. You see, I left out a couple of words in that verse just so you would kind of see very clearly what Jesus was talking about. But this is where we're really going to kind of dive in. This is where we're going over the next 4 weeks after this. Because Jesus says this. He says, but the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart. The things that come out of a person's mouth, they come from the heart. They come from within. And these things defile a person. These things are what makes you at odds with God. It says, for out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person. Jesus puts it this way. The very thing that has the potential to do the most harm to us is the very thing that is within each and every one of us. The very thing that has the potential to do the most damage to the relationships in your life is the very thing that you walk around with each and every day that processes your experiences and processes your life. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about 4 major players that when it comes to the health of your heart, not your physical heart, when it comes to the health of your spiritual heart, 4 major players that have their effects on you. And here they are. It's anger, it's guilt, it's greed, It's jealousy. You look at that list and some of you are like, skipping that week and that week. I'm good on that one, skipping that week. Cool, got it. You see, this is reality, right? These are things that we carry around with us all the time, and they find their ways out of our mouths because what we realize is they have found their ways into our hearts. And they find ways to come out of our mouths. And as you look at these four things, as you look at these four matters of your heart, just think of it like a debt-to-debtor relationship. You know, many of us know what it feels like to be in debt, but there's a difference in like that student loan debt versus somebody in the room that you know that you owe them money, or vice versa, that they owe you money. Like, you don't ever have to say anything, you don't have to point it out, but there's just like this unspoken, like, it's there, right? Everybody's thinking about it, but nobody's saying it. And in this, I think these four things, they operate this way in our lives. You see, anger says, well, you owe me. Anger says, you owe me because I didn't get my way. There's a certain way that life is supposed to go, and you are upsetting that balance for me, and so you owe me how to fix this. And when that doesn't happen, guess what? We become upset and we become angry. Guilt is the opposite of that. Guilt says that not that you owe me, it's that I owe you, that I may have wronged you, or I may have done something to you, or I may have done something that didn't live up to this standard for you. And so now I feel like I have this burden on me that I feel guilted into doing things for you. I feel shame because I don't do these things, that says, well, I owe you this. Greed is a completely separate beast because greed says, you know what? I owe me. Everything that comes my way is for me, and it's for me to ingest, it's for me to take, it's for me to just, no matter what I have to do, I'm owed this stuff. But then jealousy comes back, and jealousy says, you know what? This is something that God owes me, that there's a standard in which I think my life should go, and when it doesn't go the way that I want it to, God, what have you done? God, I want you to fix this because this is something that I'm owed in my life. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to kind of one by one take these, and we're going to look at them deeper. But my hope is that as we look at these, we're going to give you, I hope it gives you hope, but we're going to give you some tools to fight this and combat this. And so that when these things come up in your heart, it doesn't mean it's an automatic blow up. It doesn't mean you say things that you regret. That when these things come up in your heart, you can learn to condition yourself, not to modify your behavior, but you can condition yourself to modify your heart and the heart of the matter. So this morning, before you go, I have a really simple question for you. And it's probably a question that you've heard before, and it's probably, if you're like me, a question that you have even dismissed before. The question is this: how's your heart? Some of you are like, nah, I wish you wouldn't ask. But really, how's your heart? Because as we're talking about 4 tough topics that have their way in our lives and have their way of impacting our lives, as we talk through these, I know there's a tension in the room because I feel it up here. Because I look at those 4 things, I look at anger and guilt and greed and jealousy, and I'm like, me, and me. And so I know that as just a collective body of people, these are things that we feel, and they're things that we deal with day in and day out in our lives. And so my question is, how is your heart? Because if it's like mine, it's one that I know that there's some work that needs to be done. But I want to ask, like, do you find yourself saying things that you don't mean? Do you find yourself doing things that you wish that you hadn't? Do you find yourself being motivated by what you think will make somebody else happy as opposed to what may make God happy? Are you discontent with how life is going right now? Do you continually seek to point out the negative over the positive? You see, all of these things are normal things for us to experience. They're normal things for us to encounter. But I don't think these are things that we have to tolerate and deal with in our day-to-day lives. I think these are things that we can champion and that we can monitor in our lives and leave them where they need to go. So, what are we going to do about it? Okay, if we get this like level playing field, that this is all something that we're battling with us. Maybe not all 4, but at least one of these questions. What are you going to do about it? Because the easy thing is to just go, well, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to miss week 3 and no harm, no foul. But you and I both know that's not the best thing for us. I've never had a problem in my life go away because I ignored it, right? Anytime I hear a noise in the car, I'm just like, la, 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 I turn the radio up. It's like, it'll go away. It'll align itself. It's just not the way it works. And the same is true with our hearts. There may be things that flare up. There may be things that come up, and it'll never go away. if you just ignore it. So, over this next week, I got 2 challenges for you. First thing is this: pay attention. Pay attention to how you react and pay attention to how you respond in certain situations. How do you react to the people that are closest to you? Because here's the unfortunate side of this whole thing, is that when things impact our heart, it is the people that are closest to it, to us, that get impacted by that. And so, pay attention. Pay attention to how you treat the people who are closest to you. Pay attention to how you respond when things don't go your way or go the way that you think that they should go. Pay attention to your heart. And the second thing is this, is I want you to memorize a verse. You go like, oh really? I'm not in elementary school anymore, but I think that there is room. I think we can create some margin in our brains to put God's word into our hearts and into our minds, because I told our students a couple weeks ago, if we can memorize Drake and Taylor Swift lyrics, then I think there's a little bit of room for God's words to move in as well. And if Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, second to Jesus, thinks that this was valuable enough to pass on to his children, then I believe that it is something that in our lives we can make this a priority as well. But I want to challenge you to memorize this verse. Above all else, guard your hearts, for everything that you do flows from it. Above all else, guard your hearts, for everything that you do flows from it. Above all else, guard your hearts, for everything you do flows from it. Take a second, just a brief moment of your morning. What would it look like if instead of monitoring your behavior, you got to the root of the problems? If instead of trying to live up to a certain standard and knowing where you can step and where you can't step, imagine for a moment that you are somebody that lives with a heart that is not out of control, but you live as somebody whose heart is monitored and who is checked upon by yourself, by someone that's close to you. Imagine for just a moment what that would do to your relationship with God. Imagine how often you would call on him in moments that you needed help. Imagine how it would make that time that you share together better. Take it another step. Imagine what that would do to your home. Imagine what that would do in the relationship that you share with your spouse, that if you one another kind of shared your hearts together, not in the sexual way, not in the intimacy ways. Imagine what it would look like if you shared your emotions together, and some of the guys are like, are you kidding me, man? Like, you're trying to get me in trouble. But imagine what it would do to that relationship. I'll take it another step further. Imagine what that would do for the lives of your children. That if mom and dad are the ones that are modeling what it looks like to have a healthy heart, imagine what it would do for their lives to pass those habits on to them as they grow up. Imagine what it would do to your workplace. Imagine what it would do to your classroom. Imagine what it would do to your locker room if suddenly you became more focused not on your behavior, but on the heart of the matter and on what's going on inside of you. It would be an honor if you came back next week as we dive into this series a little bit more and we take these matters of our hearts a little bit more seriously. Let me pray for you, and then we'll let y'all go and have a great week. God, I'm thankful for who you are. God, selfishly, I look at my own life, and I don't like lessons like this, because I know what it does is it points out all the ways in my life that I need to be better and all of the flaws that I see when I look at myself in the mirror. But God, I'm thankful that that's not the way that you work, and that's not the way that you operate. And that when you look at us and you see flaws and you see brokenness, that what you see is opportunities in our lives, and you see ways that you can redeem our lives, and you can make us greater, and you can make us whole for something more in this world. God, I pray that you make us more like Jesus. I pray that you will allow us to see the ways that our heart is functioning well, and that you will allow us to see the ways that our hearts are not functioning well, so that when we look at this world, that when we look at the people that you created, we can look and we can love them with just the most potential and the most fully that we can, because that's the way that you love us. God, I just pray for the next 5 weeks that for my heart and for the people's hearts who hear these messages, that what they see and what they experience is nothing short of your goodness and your glory working in our lives. God, we love you so much, and we're thankful for who you are. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.